Hello again. Welcome back to Mass Media and American Politics. And today we're going to talk more about the kind of cultural critique mode of mass media analysis. And that's really the second part of a two-part video on first Adorno and Horkheimer's Dialectic of Enlightenment and Culture Industry Critique, in which I read from the culture industry chapter of that larger book by those two authors from 1944. This is a much later work from the 1980s and 90s by two other authors that are more interested in what they call specifically the political economy of the mass media. It's really just a more specific and updated take in many ways of Adorno and Horkheimer. But it's one that has really shaped at least a generation or at least influenced a generation of media criticism of at least one type. And so it's based largely on this model that these two authors came up with that they call the propaganda model. And you might even say that this model is simple, but you might say it's simplistic. Meaning a negative connotation of simple, meaning that it doesn't capture, all of the meaning of what it's supposed to be analyzing. However, from a purely analytical point of view, it at least has an attractive and kind of model of how to put into context many of the behaviors of modern media conglomerates and subsequently their news gathering operations. So as you might recall in the first video about Adorno and Horkheimer's work, we talked much about the way that Adorno and Horkheimer felt that the media simply put out as much entertainment as was possible to kind of soften the resistance of ordinary people to engage in an economy that didn't always benefit them. And this was really important, at least in terms of an update to the kind of critique of political economy that really Marx did in the 19th century. And Adorno and Horkheimer's value, at least, or at least addition to the conversation, was that in the United States, especially in the 1940s, in a burgeoning kind of movie industry, as well as radio, there was all kinds of very, what might be called cookie cutter entertainment, a lot of very formulaic kinds of movies that they saw being adopted, where the hero is always really, is always beset by enemies and looks like he's going to be defeated, and it's always a man. And that hero seeks everything in good humor, but then finally triumphs over adversity and gives kind of a Hollywood happy ending to the film. And so that takes place in film and movies and TV eventually. And TV was really just starting at the time. And advertising, it really was all the advertising of how to look and seem more attractive to people. Kind of the kind of physical and attractiveness and appeal that people see. And so Adorno and Horkheimer both felt that this was simply not really a choice, and this was really the illusion of choice. And the illusion of choice is kind of this ironic formulation that allows people to think that they are engaging in free consumer choice when actually they're just choosing between two very similar things. This is the critique that very kind of outside of the mainstream political parties and candidates will always say that Democrats and Republicans, there's not much difference between them. I think most people can see that there are differences between the two parties. But in terms of governing and effectiveness and many of the policies that have continuity in U.S. Presidential politics between one president to the next, there's actually a heavy degree of continuity between say, the Bush administration to the Obama administration to the Trump administration. Not everything began with the Trump administration, right? So all of that is to say that that the typical critique of having a Democrat and Republican that seem very similar means that you're foreclosing the possibility that there are other choices out there. And through a lot of structural kind of constraints in the U.S. political system, we're not really allowed to see other political parties as viable choices. And so in much the same way, Adorno and Horkheimer felt that this illusion of choice was this choice between, for example, Apple and Android, or Windows and Mac. And let's get out of Apple for a second. Between Ford and GM, or Toyota and Lexus is part of Toyota, so Toyota and Hyundai and all the other car companies, where they make all the same kinds of cars, right? And it's all just sort of fine-grained differences that don't matter to most people. But you sort of feel a sense of, anyone who lives in this economy, feels a sense of, accomplishment maybe, or just some satisfaction of choice from just having decided to go in one direction or another of your consumer profile. And that consumer profile, Adorno and Horkheimer argue, is really just the freedom to choose what is always the same, and just kind of joining the herd, as it were. And so Chomsky and Herman come along in 1986 and 7, and they have a couple of different names for what they talk about, and I just want to give you the names before I go into the ideas. Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media, is the book that they eventually wrote about this. Another book is called Necessary Illusions. And a lot of what they do has been, a lot of the language that they use, as well as this other one, propaganda model, has been criticized as being, really, like, critics who dismiss it completely say that it's conspiracy theory. And I don't think that that's an accurate critique, only because Chomsky and Herman don't talk about a concerted, ongoing, outwardly spoken conspiracy of any kind, like between, for example, studio executives. I think that their real critique is that it points out that there are these incentives that only exist because the system is set up in a certain way to kind of distract people from the kind of more economically productive, in other ways, economically productive areas of their lives that are classified as work. And what it does is it opens up really a new form of economic output and labor by that same population. So by day, for example, you might think of it, if you want to analogize it to superheroes, it's kind of a theme I'll keep coming back to, I guess. Mr. and Ms. Consumer are actually by day, are Mr. and Mrs. Consumer by day, and they're Mr. and Ms. Worker. I reversed it. Okay, the Mr. and Ms. Consumer by night, and Mr. and Ms. Consumer, Mr. and Ms. Worker by day. Oh boy. So worker by day, consumer by night. That's what I'm saying. And weekend. Don't forget weekends. So, and voter and political leader and all those other, and like artist, all that stuff is squeezed out, right? They're saying that there's no room for, alternative structures of power or influence because people are just too damn tired. And just want to be entertained, and just want their families, right, to be safe, but also the critique, at least from Adorno and Horkheimer, and then subsequently from Chomsky and Herman, is that the entertainment is an end in of itself because it's economically profitable not only to the media in terms of the money they receive just by people purchasing entertainment, but also it's the general kind of motor of the economy that functions on consumerism, which is an enormous part of the U.S. Economic output every year. It's just people buying things, is really driven by this media consumption and advertising that fuels that consumption. And the advertising is only fueled by the media, and so there's this kind of symbiotic relationship. And then also there is a need to capitalize on people's willingness to just purchase that media, in addition to it being profitable to just the general kind of economy that thrives on advertising. So media itself and the advertising that kind of feeds on it, and also pays for it in some respects, is this kind of our evidence for the fact that the media itself and entertainment itself all has an economic justification, and none of it is kind of for art itself, right? And that's one of the main critiques Adorno and Horkheimer have, is that art is not an engine of itself anymore. Art is kind of just technology for economic profit. And so it doesn't need constant collusion and whispered conversations and and kind of constant communication in order to keep people distracted. It's just baked in to the system, and people understand that they have their primary responsibilities are kind of economic productive activity, and they think that they themselves are just free consumers who can decide what they want to do in their free time. But in actuality, because there's so much advertising and so much constant kind of media activity around what people could be doing that's more pleasant and pleasurable than doing things like engaging in creative functions like art that aren't for profit, and also but also just political activity that would enable people to kind of get more control over their political system and their economic system. People are distracted from that. So they're not really allowed to be a whole person outside of the worker consumer model, like voter, political activist, maybe, artist, of any kind. When I say artist, I don't mean just people sitting around and painting. I mean like community theater or community member, really. People have very little time in their kind of midlife, for example, to go and be members of the Elks Club or the Rotarians or anything like that. They just are just too concerned with work and other responsibilities. So anyway, this in this context, Chomsky and Herman seek to update this with some of this vocabulary, that all of this, the mass media and the news media in concert with it, are mere necessary illusions that feed into a propaganda model that manufacture consent. It makes people think that what they want is actually what's good for the economy, when in fact their individuality and creativity perhaps is best served by some kind of creative difference that is not celebrated in this model. So let's finally kind of focus on this. So both in the book that they wrote and the film they created later, which I'll link to on the website as well, they have this kind of 5-part propaganda model. And when they say political economy of the mass media, they mean just the interplay between economics and politics. And one definition is the political, economic, and cultural factors that affect the production and distribution of wealth. So the dominant culture and social values and economic status of the country. So the first thing that, and maybe this is better looked at as a cycle, but ownership of the mass media is concentrated. So all of the content that you see, even if it's on YouTube and it seems more free, even though that's owned by one of the world's biggest corporations, Google and Alphabet, ownership of the mass media is concentrated in just 5 companies. We're talking about Disney, AT&T, Viacom / Paramount, and oh man, I can never remember the others. Comcast, and let's see, ABC, CBS, and I think News Corp is the last one. News Corp that owns Fox News and the New York Post and most of that stuff. And they sometimes sell units between each other. I guess News Corp sold off 20th Century Fox to Disney, and so now they have all of those Marvel Studio movies, for example. But ownership is kind of what you need to understand is that 90% of what you see, hear, and listen to, of what everyone sees, hears, and listens to, is distributed and owned by 5 companies, and that's it. It used to be, when manufacturing consent came out, it was like 32 companies, and that was 30 years ago, in the late 1980s. But it heavily influences. So the pressures of stockholders, directors, and bankers are also powerful forces affecting the content of these companies' media content. And so those are profit-oriented forces. They're looking for views so that they can sell advertising. The media does have daily news needs and a need for steady, reliable sources of news material. And so maintaining news reporters all around the world is not really financially stable for the news. This is something we've gone over before in terms of the incentives that news organizations have in order to provide real socially valuable but not market profitable news information to the public for the purposes of their kind of voter and citizen education is just not financially profitable, because it's like, I think I just drew the analogy, it's like eating your vegetables, right? It's not something that when people are given the choices between vegetables and dessert, they choose dessert. And so the vegetables are really just is the valuable content that seems kind of boring, but is completely relevant to people's lives. It's just not of the moment. It's not dramatic enough to hold people's interests from day to day. And so at the national level, news is often just boiled down to 30-second sound bites of the Senate did this, the president reacted this way, film at 11. But you don't really watch the film at 11, and you don't watch. And all you have heard today is probably something on social media about what the president said and how that drowned out, whatever else the House and the Senate tried to do or other political actors ended up doing. So at any rate, news sourcing becomes enveloped and engrossed in just whatever is good for their advertisers. So we'll talk more about this in some of the chapter discussion in Iyengar, but the advertising kind of piggybacks on whatever's profitable for them, as well as the interests of the owners are what influences what the editorial content is of the news itself. So then once it's kind of gone through the processing and distribution stage, the news, and this all doesn't take place in a vacuum. This is all very much interrelated, all of these steps, but maybe it's best when we're first looking at it to just see it as a sequential process. So from ownership to creating the infrastructure for news creation and distribution, and then the selling to advertisers of time for them to advertise on your television station or in your newspaper or minutes on your radio dial. Then it's best to think of it, okay, now that that's been done, now people hear it, see it, watch it, listen to it, and read it. And then that's when there's a filter created here, and these are all understood as filters in the model. is this filter of ideology. People have chosen an ideology. And like Adorno and Horkheimer said before, when you choose an ideology, which is kind of a preset set of beliefs and lenses and almost prefabricated conclusions to what you're going to see in the news, you've chosen just what is always going to be the same and what will just reinforce the way you see the world. And so once it's been filtered through those ideological lenses, which all the public has some form of in different forms, then that creates some flack inevitably. And flack is just their word for negative feedback from consumers. And to the extent that they're dissatisfied or offended even by all of this, they produce some form of negative feedback that could be kind of cyclically turned back into some kind of voter fueled political action that seeks to censor the media content, or in some way seeks to influence the way that the media is created, or this isn't, if we can stop thinking of it in terms purely of media, the products that are advertised are not media products. They're advertised through the media. So whether that's food, travel, tourism, or just standard issue products and services. So, phones, of course, televisions, movies, and let's see, cars and plane rides, and just clothes. Just looking around this room, my room's kind of a mess here. Maps and furniture and comic books and technology and photographs and I think I've named all the big categories. Clothes, I'll say again. So all of that stuff is advertised through the media, and to the extent that people are dissatisfied with their products themselves or with the media, they have that kind of, they don't have necessarily energy to do it, but they have this inclination to somehow produce a negative feedback effect for all of these products and services and all of the media. But the better job that the media does in distracting people by way of getting them to consume more products or just more media, then that media machine is able to more effectively keep on a productive kind of trajectory, as opposed to slowing down and waiting for those negative feedback effects to take place. So preventing those negative feedback effects is exactly what manufacturing consent means. It manufactures the pleasant feeling that people get by engaging in economically productive activity, as opposed to economically perhaps not productive, but instead countervailing cultural or political forces against whatever the economy is doing or is attempting to get them to do. So this can take the form of phone calls, letters, petitions, lawsuits, speeches, and bills in front of a legislature or Congress. But when it's produced by individuals or groups with large resources, it can be uncomfortable and costly for the kind of large media and other conglomerates that are attempting to keep the economic system running. So this is the idea, and you can see, I think, very quickly what the implications for an argument like this might be to the overall kind of news structure and the way that it's incentivized. So the next video I'll have, the last of the three, will be about chapters 5 and 8. So I'm going to reverse what I said in the syllabus, and so Chomsky and Adorno first, and then the third will be simply about chapters 5 and 8 and summarizing some of those main points, and that'll probably be also about 30 minutes. So if you have questions or want to engage in some commentary about these, you're going to have the chance during your module essay. And certainly we'll be able to talk about it in class a little bit in terms of asking some questions to clarify their model. But I urge you to read the attached article about the propaganda model that's written by Herman, updated from Chomsky and Herman's theory. And then also, if you have time, I was, and I can say this now because I'm 40, when I was your age, I watched Manufacturing Consent for the first time in college, and it had, I won't say that it completely changed my mind about everything, it really didn't. But at the time it was kind of shocking, but maybe it's nothing shocking anymore. Maybe it's a little too dated and the film quality isn't great. I know I'm building it up really well. But just the way that the clarity with which Chomsky's voice is used to express the theory was pretty stark, and I think probably more effective than my lecture is here. So I would urge you to take a look at that, even though it's kind of a long movie. But it's better than just watching the Cliff Notes all the time, frankly. So I urge you to watch Manufacturing Consent, not making it mandatory, but I think you should. And the Adorno, I may try to link another video that further explains Adorno and Horkheimer to you. Okay, well, this has been fun. So I will talk to you again for the final time later on today, and that'll be about chapters 5 and 8 in the Iyengar textbook. Okay, if you have any questions, please come talk to me between 2:30 and 4 on Tuesday and Thursday, or during class at 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Okay, thanks for watching.